afternoon, and welcome to this week's episode of LevelUp Cyber. My name is Tony Bryan, your host and Executive Director of CyberUp. Thanks again for joining us today. I hope, for those that tune in each week, you like our guests and like our show. This one is a little bit different. I'm excited about today's topic where we're going to jump into the world of kind of cyber labs and how to build one at your home. I know it's been a thing that we have talked about for years and a great way to highlight skills and really show a little bit of extra initiative for individuals trying to make that transition into that first job. And recently had the opportunity to meet Nimish Datta, our guest today. And he is early in his career building out what he wants to do and trying to find his own path and journey. And in the process of that has built out his own home lab and range, which is exciting to hear about. So Nimish, thanks for joining us today. I've had a great pleasure of getting to know you. I'd love to have you take a second, introduce yourself, share a little bit about your own kind of career journey and how you got to where you're at today in your career.
Hi, Tony. Good afternoon. First of all, thank you for having me. For the people who don't know me, my name is Nimish Datta. I'm originally from India, all over the place. My father was in the Air Force, traveled a lot, and came to St. Louis, United States in January of 2022 for my master's degree in cybersecurity. I've actually taken the conventional path in cybersecurity where I went and got my degree, spent tens of thousands of dollars, got my certifications, and in that manner, I'm trying to get into this industry. So I've taken a pretty conventional approach, but what I've learned from it is that anyone who is coming into this field doesn't have to do or spend as much as I have in order to break in. And I hope we can talk a little bit about that, and I can showcase a little bit about how you can upskill yourself and get into this field.
Yeah, so a lab and a range, right? There's a lot of commercial products. There's a lot of opportunities and things that are out there and a way to learn, right? And, let's start with the very basics here. And I think it's probably an important part just to set the ground floor of where we're at. Like, what is a lab and a range? What is the intended purposes? What would one person do with it? Like, let's start at the very basics and just start like, what is a lab and a range and what is its purpose?
All right. So in the context of cybersecurity, a home lab would be a virtualized environment which you can control. So in a traditional environment, you have multiple computers in a network. You have 5 or 6 or 10 or maybe hundreds of people working in an environment. All of their computers need to be networked so that they can communicate with each other. There needs to be switches, routers, all of this enterprise setup available to them. So when you start off protecting a cybersecurity environment, you ideally would like to have a lab that's as big as that, where you can work on all these computers, learn how to protect them, set up Active Directory, configure identity and access management, perform vulnerability scanning. But if you don't have a job or you don't have access to all those machines, it can be a little tricky. So in that case, what you do is you set up a virtualized environment all within your own house inside your little 15-inch laptop, where you can just install a bunch of virtualized machines or virtual machines within a hypervisor environment. And you can have different operating systems which you can work on, try to understand, and then have them network with each other and communicate with each other. As for the range, I would suggest if you can buy a decent i5 or i7 laptop, I would highly recommend an i7 laptop. If you can get an i9, that would be amazing. So anything from $500 to $2,000, depending on your budget, is more than enough to get you started.
That's a great answer. So, I'm sure most people think, and you just alluded a little bit to the price. I mean, to do this, it's going to cost me $9 million, right? Like, there's all this technology. Like, I really want to get Splunk in my thing, or I want to start adding these softwares and technologies, right? So, of course, it's going to cost me a gazillion dollars to have all these things to do it. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. You alluded to it a little bit. I know what we talked about just a little bit before we hopped on. So, like, as you sat down and made the decision, this is something that you want to do, what approach did you take? I'm sure there was a project plan or maybe laid out or some sort of like framework that you wanted to build, like where did you start to really come up with the idea and to drive and inform what you were putting into your ring?
Okay, so I've got a funny story about how I got started into making my own home lab and setting up all these different virtual machines and just trying to figure out how all these things work. It happened from a failed interview. So I was sitting in an interview. I won't mention the company's name, but I just embarrassed myself. I had absolutely no clue what was going on, and it was for a position that was way above my pay grade at the time. So, but the interviewer was actually extremely nice, and she pointed me to a couple areas where I could get started off. She told me how I could get started in the industry, what I could do, what kinds of software I could install on my computer and get started with that. So, as soon as that interview happened, I took a couple days to get back to baseline in terms of my mental condition. But after that, I just hopped onto YouTube, found as many free resources I could. There's a bunch of amazing content creators out there like Josh McAdor and Network Chuck, Josh Hammond. All these people, they just keep posting amazing cybersecurity projects, and uh, YouTube is full of all these free resource materials. I just chose a project in the beginning where uh, I had to set up a cloud environment in Azure Active Directory in Microsoft Azure, and then I set up Azure Sentinel, and I just opened my computer to the whole world and let them attack on it. And then basically, I wanted to see which countries I was getting attacked from. So that was the first kind of project that I started on. Later on, I downloaded these hypervisor environments like VirtualBox or VMware. For the people who don't know this, these are free applications that are available on the internet. Downloaded them, and after that, I downloaded ISO files. So uh, these are virtualized machines which you can install onto your system. I installed Ubuntu. This is for anyone who wants to learn Linux. Linux is actually very important for any person who's trying to get into cyber. So that's one of the first machines that I installed onto my system, onto my Windows machine. And then I installed a Kali Linux operating system. Those were the first two virtual machines that I started getting used to. I learned Linux on them, learned a little bit of scripting, and that was my initial days of working.
Now, as you built this out, have you had support with others, or has this been an entirely solo adventure for you?
In the beginning, it was an entirely solo adventure, but as I kept moving forward, I got into the current position that I'm in. I'm currently teaching as a cybersecurity instructor. I had built quite a few skills by that moment. Till that time, whatever I had learned by myself, but I got an exponential boost as soon as I came in contact with my mentor and teacher, who was also my supervisor at the time, Mr. Michael Bird. He had developed an amazing curriculum for himself. All the things that he had learned, I had the pleasure of learning them firsthand from him. And anywhere I would get stuck, he would just point me to 15 different resource materials, and that basically expounded my growth. So he actually taught me how to set up Active Directory. It was from him that I learned the whole concept of Active Directory, how you can set it up, how you can perform identity and access management. And yes, most of what I'd learned in the beginning was my own, but as soon as I got in touch with him, it went from 0 to 100 real quick.
So let's take a second to like maybe map out, because I'm sure somebody listening right now is probably thinking, I can never do this. You know what I mean? Like, and I think to your point, there's a lot of this as you explored and asked questions and found videos and tools and things to help you do it. So it's not an insurmountable thing, but maybe we walk through, what an upfront kind of level, we'll call it level one, because I can't think of a better term off the top of my head, like a level one lab or range that you would do a, very basic set of skills up to maybe a level 2, 3, 4, or 5, right? Like level 5 being, we'll call it an academic level of kind of range or a lab, right? Where there's tons of resources and things, and maybe 3's a community-based lab, right? So like, let's say in your scenario, at one point you were a 1, you're probably at a 2 right now as you've built some more things out. Like, where do I start? Where can I go? I find, should I make a list of priorities? Should I focus it on the type of careers that I think I want to have? And I just answered that, riddled you with like 17 questions. But in the process of this, where do I start? You know what I mean? Like, how do I know where to begin and build this thing out?
All right. Let's take it from the basics. So the first thing that you want to figure out is, how do I get a hypervisor in my system? Would it be okay if I shared my screen?
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be great.
All right. Perfect. Let me go ahead and share my screen. So I have a Firefox browser open in front of me. The first thing that I want to point out is VirtualBox. And I do want to point out, Google is your best friend. If you have any doubts or any questions, please do not hesitate to do a simple Google search. Anything that you require answers to, it's just a couple clicks away. So the first thing I want to install is a software like VirtualBox or VMware. I would suggest VirtualBox because this is an easier software to install for most beginners. Once I download that and install it onto my system, it looks something like this. All right, I have VirtualBox on my system. And the next thing I would want to do is install a Linux distribution. Now, there are multiple Linux distributions to choose from. The one that I prefer for beginners is Ubuntu. So you can go onto the Ubuntu website and you can click on this second link, which is download Ubuntu desktop. Once you're on this page, you can just click on download 24.04.1 LTS. This is the latest version of Ubuntu, and it will download an ISO file. Make sure that you have good distinctions in your folder. Just let me get to this particular folder. As you can see, I've made a folder in my computer where I have organized and segregated all of the different operating systems that I have. You should get a file like this, Ubuntu 24.04 desktop AMD64.ISO. Once you have these two components, what you want to do is you want to click in your Oracle VirtualBox Manager and you want to add a new machine. And now what's going to happen is, if I could just be, is there a whiteboard in this setting which I could use? If not, then I'll just explain it orally. So what I usually do is, how I explain this to students, your host machine, which could be your Windows machine, which could be your Mac machine, it has a specific set of resources. Let's say you're using a laptop with 12 gigs of RAM and 1 terabyte of storage. That storage can be divided amongst these different operating systems. So you could decide to give Ubuntu, I could just type in the name Ubuntu, and I can select an ISO image. I can choose the image that I had downloaded. So let's say, for example, I choose this. Let me just go into that directory and choose that image. Just a second. I'll go into Documents, Virtual Machine, ISOs. Let's say, for the sake of demonstration, I choose one of these ISOs. I'm not able to find that at the moment, but let's just choose. Let's say, for example, you downloaded that particular file that I just showed you, this right here. You can choose that over here. You can click Next. And then you can start allocating resources to all of your different virtual machines. So you can allocate, let's say, 4 gigs of RAM. You can allocate storage for this device. Now, when you have your computer set up, you can just start working on this machine as if this is a separate laptop, as if this is a separate machine that you have. So this would be one of the first steps as a complete beginner. The next resource I would want to point out toward for anyone that wants to learn Linux, go on YouTube, search for Linux tutorials. And I would have, as I was telling you, there are some amazing resources available online. You could have someone like Network Chuck tell you how to run Linux, and you'll find multiple different courses. All you need is a Ubuntu system, something like this video to get you started, 60 Linux commands that you need to know in 10 minutes. Get a basic understanding of what you want to work on. And once you have that understanding, then you are ready to move on to level 2. That's what I would suggest in the beginning. So
that's great. I mean, and I think it's a testament to your point of like, this doesn't have to be complicated, right? We as humans have a tendency to make things a lot more complicated most of the time for stuff, but there are a lot of great resources and information on YouTube of people just like yourself, right? And actually, if you want to take this just one step further, a lot of folks I know that build out these labs or ranges actually create the content and the how-to on YouTube, because it does give you an extra place to point people to show and highlight your skills, right? Like, that's the number one thing when I think of these technical interviews where they try to ask you these questions to think through. Not necessarily you got to have the right answer, but they're really looking for your thought process and the logic you apply that you're going to bring to your employer, right, as a solution if you get stuck on something. So even the sheer fact of what you're doing of trying to plan out the range in the lab and solving problems and then sharing that with others gives you a leg up and an advantage over many folks, right? Just from the sheer fact that you're showing others how to do it and you're walking through more so than just the clickety click, that shows that you know what you're doing rather than just, kind of winging it. So great answer. So as you look to kind of your next chapter, right? What do you hope to do? Do you have greater plans for your home lab to continue to build on that? Do you, what's kind of on the horizon for you with what you're building?
So what I showed you in the beginning was just a very basic version of what you can do in your home environment. I do want to emphasize for anyone that's trying to break into this industry, you only can expand your lab to whatever knowledge you have present in front of you. For example, if you don't know much about the space, there's not much room for expansion, right? For example, if you only know about the 4 walls within your home and you don't know there's a whole world out there, you'll only try to navigate your environment within those 4 walls. There's nothing wrong with that, but the more you find out about this field, the more you learn, the more you read, the more kind of resources you gather information from, the more your home lab experience will also flourish and will get enriched. For example, if I'll just share my screen once again, there was an exploit that had happened a couple years ago. There was this Eternal Blue exploit that a lot of people talked about. It would exploit the SMB file sharing service, which is port 445. And now again, I have given up a lot of information in this. What is SMB file sharing? What is port 445? What do I do with all of this information? So the first things first, you need to understand that you need to go on Google, type up SMB, try to understand what a server message block is, read up on it. Then you can use an environment like Kali Linux, and then you can use up any of these YouTube tutorials on how to exploit the Eternal Blue vulnerability, or MS17010, and then that lets you learn more and more. You can keep doing these small projects on the side, but the one big thing that I think is not going away anytime soon is Active Directory. It's going to shift from a traditional server environment onto the cloud environment. Nowadays, it's called Microsoft AD Entra, if it's on Azure. So I would highly suggest for any beginner, after you learn how to install Ubuntu on your system, download a Windows Server 2022 and configure Active Directory on it. There should be many videos online on how to configure Active Directory. just choose any of these ones. Try to understand what Active Directory is. Try to understand how you can set up a domain controller, how you can set up member servers, how you can set up a Linux machine in that, how you can give resources, how you can provide identity and access management to these different resources. That will significantly upskill you, and it'll give you a lot more to talk about to any potential employer. So that's what I have been doing as well in my home lab. I have these different types of virtual machines. So Metasploitable is an intentionally vulnerable machine that a lot of penetration testers and offensive cybersecurity individuals can use to break into, hack into. It's all these different things that you can do. You can perform SQL injection, cross-site scripting attacks, and you can host all of your websites on this. But then again, it comes back to that basic conversation of how much do I know? How much do I need to learn? And on the basis of that, how can I bring what I've learned into life? So you do need to have a foundational aspect where you understand what cybersecurity is, what the CIA triad is, what vulnerability scanning is, what port scanning is. All of these things can then be brought to life in the real world.
Yeah, it's a great model and a great concept. Have you had much help? Like, have you had other folks have jumped in, or have you kind of collaborated with other folks to give into the range, or have you kind of kept this to yourself for now?
I have had massive help from a lot of individuals that I've interacted with. As I told you, Mr. Bird, he taught me a lot about this space. There were other colleagues that I would ask for help. And then for the most part, I used to go online, try to look for courses that I could learn, either paid or for free. And then most of the information that I've gathered is from those sources. And I've since I did the master's program, there was a lot of theoretical understanding of the area that I had already gotten, which I could then later on go into the practical aspects of.
Yeah, well, I think that's always the number one challenge, right? Whether you're a college or a boot camp or whatever, is how do you take those verbal skills you're hearing, right, or the concepts that you're learning in those classes and actually begin to apply those in an environment that makes sense. And so obviously you can't just go and make viruses and hack things, legally, to go try and build your skills, or intentionally, drop exploits on people. That's, frowned upon in 2024 and probably now in the eternity of time. But finding, hearing things like, I know we had a lab in a range several years ago. We're in the process of building one back here in the St. Louis market. But that was in the heyday of WannaCry exploit, right? That was, a pretty big one several years ago. So, we wanted to help people find ways to stop and prevent it, right? And if I remember correctly, that breach happened to get accidentally stopped, right? Like somebody happened to stumble across a thing or some code or script, if I remember correctly, that it accidentally stopped the bleeding from the WannaCry breach, right? And so, what better way than to put it into a droplet or some sort of containerized environment that you can click a button which is alluded to earlier, find a way to solve the problem or that challenge and spin it up and either, stop it or not, but in a safe environment that if you don't, you have the ability to not let it separate out and obviously infect other environments that are adjacent to your network and stuff. So a lot of interesting kind of best practices there to do and to build that I think most folks wouldn't necessarily think about, because you're like, oh, it's a breach. It is what it is. It happened. I'm never going to get to play with it, so finding those things. So, and I know you and I alluded a little bit earlier before we hopped on, quick number. You told me before I hopped on, but you'd get into this, right? But what's a reasonable person expect to spend on a lab or a range, to build this out?
So as I specified before as well, the main expense that you're going to face is with the laptop. Other than that, your Wi-Fi bill can also be included as another expense in this whole project. But other than that, there's not a lot of extra expenses in the beginning, at least. Later on, you can expand it to a hardware firewall that you can configure in your house. You can have IDS, IPS systems, or you can pay for something like a Splunk SIM, You can pay for Nessus, you can pay for Burp Suite. It can be as expensive as you would like, but at the very bare bones of the project, I would suggest, if you want a good i7 or i9 laptop and you don't want to spend a lot of money, look for resources like eBay, Facebook Marketplace. Those places you could find good laptops for a decent price, and anywhere from $500 to $1,000 is more than enough on such a venture. Other than that, there's no added expenses or costs to that. I would suggest, if you have a resource like YouTube available, try to spend as much time as possible on that, and then build your lab from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think I know the stuff that we spent for ours was, some of the data storage and the droplets there to be able to put the content into the cloud. We ran a couple, we'll call them simulations, if you will, and ran a couple things that required a couple extra accoutrements, right? Like we bought 5 or 6 phone numbers that we needed to use for a project we were working on. Similar things like that, where you may have to buy some periphery things. But to your point, you really don't need to spend a ton of money to have servers and racks. This could all be done via a laptop. And then my advice, we're very fortunate in St. Louis to have a micro center. Micro center is fantastic. You can realistically, to Nimish's point, go find yourself a $500 i5, a great, good processor, a laptop that's going to do just about anything you could possibly want it to do. I know for us, we have found kind of gaming laptops there that are actually cheaper, on sale prices than some of your more up-to-date laptops that would be business, just because, maybe it's a processor that's old. But these are coming with i7s and an advanced graphics card for all under $500. So Micro Center doesn't pay me to promote them by any means. I just know that they generally take good care of their customers. It gets you out of a box store, and there's nothing wrong with the Target or Walmart or Sam's Clubs for your computers, but they're more mass produced for just general daily type of things and word processing, where what you're describing is probably a little bit more advanced, but doesn't require a mega supercomputer from the federal government to drive it, right? As you look ahead, would you be open if people wanted to reach out to you and maybe kind of learn more about your lab and space, and maybe you find some friends to contribute more and more things? Is this a forever project for you, or do you think, you kind of hit an end point where you start adding things onto it?
Well, I think there's a lot that can be expanded on in the interim. I think for the next couple of years, there's a lot of things that I could learn. I am planning on getting into application cybersecurity as well, because that's where I see the trend moving on in the future. So before I have to shell out any actual cash for hardware, I think for the next couple of years, I am sorted. There's a lot of things that I could be learning. So that's that. Also, you alluding to your point about if anyone wants to reach out to me, I'd be more than happy to collaborate with them. There's a lot more that I can learn from people, and a lot more that I can provide to people as well. So both aspects, I think I answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great ways, and I think the advice that I generally give, if you start following capture the flags, right? And again, I think the frameworks of a capture a flag in the lab all too often are very similar things. The idea is, right, here is a problem, here is a solution. How do you put it into it? So it is a great way to help build out challenges and things in a safe way for folks to practice with, So finding national CTFs, right, that happen, because there's, you find a CTF time, I think it is. There's tons of websites that promote those. And then after the completion of those, actually finding the videos and the how-to guides are an incredible resource, right, where folks compete. Maybe they get stuck and can't figure it out, so they do a write-up about it, or maybe they solve it and they want to give out the keys. But it is a really great way to learn the tools and tricks that you just alluded to build out challenges and scenarios in a lab and a range. And it's going to help you get ideas and facilitate some of those thoughts and thinking for everybody to really get ahead of the power curve. So we're at the end of our 30, which again always goes fast. Everybody gets the same last question, but what advice would you give to somebody looking to level up their cybersecurity career?
All right. If anyone wants to get into this field, level up their career, I would say start from the basics. keep polishing your basics till you feel like you're there, and then go back and polish them some more. Learn subnetting. Subnetting is extremely important from a networking point of view. You need to know how to subnet different computers, how to create VLANs. You need to understand the concept of VLANs. That's one. Learn shell scripting. Learn Bash. Learn PowerShell is extremely functional, very important. Also, learn how you can navigate a Linux-based environment. Most of the cybersecurity that happens in an enterprise environment is within Linux. Learn that, and learning a programming language like Python will always benefit you, no matter what anyone else says, no matter how many strides ChatGPT or any other AI takes in the future. Anyone who has a programming background will definitely benefit in the cybersecurity space. So if there's nowhere else, go ahead from learn the basics of cybersecurity, learn Bash scripting, learn to navigate a Linux environment, and learn Python. Those are the 4 things that I would say you can do to level up your skills.
It's really good advice. The Python is one that sticks, and I hope that the point around the AI stuff and just different tools to help write that. I don't think you take the human aspect out of this, because enemies will continue to be humans, right? I mean, I think there will be tools that will make things easier, but at the end of the day, it's still going to be a person to a person trying to figure out what makes that other person weak or vulnerable to find those breaches. So, man, I am very appreciative. This is a topic that I've been wanting to cover for quite a while. So appreciate your, enthusiasm to labs, home labs, and sharing just your kind of best practices with everybody today. For those that are tuned in, I encourage you to reach out. And if you have questions or want to, get support or figure out a way to build your own lab, Nimish has already offered he would do it, but, don't sleep on his advice of YouTube is a great resource for it. So Nimish, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate the words of wisdom, and thank you everybody for tuning in. Until next time, hope everybody has a great week, and we'll see you soon. Thanks a lot.